Okay, let's talk jellyfish. And I think if I remember this link correctly, it's to a video that's called "There's No Such Thing as a Jellyfish," which is actually quite beautiful if you like these creatures. Our inspiration today is the tentacles of a Portuguese man-o'-war, which is a kind of jellyfish that you would encounter on the beaches, like down by Galveston. You get little sort of bluish ones, and then they turn purple when they get bigger, I think. Um, yeah. So, jellyfish and corals are both in this group called the cnidaria, and they're kind of the same thing. So, there are plenty of organisms in the group that will have both a jellyfish like phase of their life, something like this, and they will then have a sort of a rooted phase of their life, which we call a medusa. Rather, the medusa is here, and you call this a colony or a polyp. And they're essentially the same thing. Like, imagine the jellyfish like this, and imagine the coral as something like upside down jellyfish that's made a little home for itself out of stone, basically. Yeah, at least in the ones that biomineralize. In terms of genetics, of the ones that we have now, this is a pretty good family tree for them. Most of the corals that we know, the things you would think of as corals and sea anemones, are in this group called the hexacorals, which means that in an early stage of their life, you can slice them in half like a little fruit ninja, and you will find six fold symmetry inside. The way corals work is they will divide off parts of their body. For example, you keep your replicating organs away from your digestive organs. They call these mesenteries, and there's little chambers on the inside. In some of the cnidarians that make biomineralized homes, you'll see these as little walls, and so they call them septa. That are going to sort of block off, at least partially, the connection between the chambers. They're not ever going to fully block it off because there needs to be some communication. The babies need to get out, the food needs to come in, etc. So yeah, you've got these hexacorals. You've got the more sort of primitive, older-looking corals that you find a lot in the very deep ocean, and they're going to be called octocorals. They're always going to have eightfold symmetry, just exactly eightfold symmetry. And they're usually kind of a spread out thing like this, and they're frankly quite beautiful. Yeah. And then you've got your various things that would be classified with the jellyfish to the untrained eye, but they make up several other groups, like the cubozoans. These are also called box jellyfish. Hydrozoans include a lot of what you and I, or people outside the class, what your mother would think of as a jellyfish, as do some of these other groups. Staurozoans are a rare and peculiar group that live upside down and kind of rooted. Here are my kids in younger years on a beach with a whole bunch of jellyfish. Look at them there. This is the Jellyfish Hospital, one of my favorite pictures. Here are some fossils of a Cambrian beach, and I think this is either Cambrian or late Precambrian. No, I think it is Cambrian, actually. And you can see what appear to be little fossils of something kind of like jellyfish that are on a beach. Yeah, so it happened then, and it happens now, at least as far as we can tell. All right, let's get in our Wayback Machine. Let's go back to the Ediacaran. What have we got going on here? What are the things that people have called cnidarian from this time? And critically evaluating this, do we think they actually are cnidarians? Now, to be in the group cnidaria, cnidaria, the name actually comes from the same root as nettles. And I don't know if you've ever touched a nettle, but nettles sting you. They have little sacs. I think they have, there's an acid inside there. I forget which one. And they have a little hair on the surface. And when you bump against the hair, the sac releases all this toxic stuff. And yeah, your hand swells up. It feels like you're burning. They're just terrible little plants. Very common in England. We ran into them many times in England. So anyway, cnidaria will hunt. These are little predators. They'll often stay rooted, But in their tentacles, most of these will have there's a little cells, specialized cells that have a little pouch in them called a nidocyst, or nidocyst, I guess, that releases. It has a compressed, it has like a little barbed hook, and it has a long sort of protein filament, just like if you were spearfishing. And the hook is going to be tipped with or soaked in various toxic proteins. So it's going to be like venom, essentially. And it's going to be it's going to impale its prey. It's going to numb them and or paralyze them with the venom. That's the goal anyway. And then the jellyfish can sort of grab this and shove it whole into its mouth. It sort of opens up the center of the organism, and that's the mouth. Yeah, because jellyfish are amazing, as are corals. They're really cool to watch. So it's those particular cells that define the modern ones, as well as genetic similarity. I suppose if you found one that was genetically grouping within the existing cnidaria, so it's this little branch, but did not have some of these cells or was missing a feature, you would say, oh, okay, it has lost this feature. You wouldn't necessarily throw it out of the group or break the group up. What we've got, though, are these guys. They're called Nemeana simplex. You get tons and tons of them in both the Ediacaran of Australia and particularly, most notably, in the White Sea region of Russia. So this is where you also get Ediacaran fossils. There's also something apparently in Ukraine where you get a bunch of these. And so what you get are, since it's Ediacaran, it's going to be death mask preservation. So these things stick up on the fossil, which means you're dealing with an upside down thing, which means you're dealing with little pouches, little hollow pockets. And they're big ones and little ones next to each other. They have little concentric wrinkles in them, as if, something was in there and was sort of squished down, something rubbery or something dried out, or, consistent with bands of muscles you would find in modern cnidaria. But what you can't see is the top, because, death mass preservation, and this is all you get. The sand fills in these little chambers, and so whatever is there is really delicate and is squished by sand completely, is the idea. Or else they're just something different than what we've thought they are. So you see them drawn like this, and that's a great drawing. Honestly, I wish I could draw that well. Problem is, I don't believe there is strong evidence that anyone has ever found, or at least that I've ever seen, that there are any tentacles in the top of this. So it's a little hollow pouch like so that gets filled in with sand like so, but was it a cnidarian? Is the only feature that makes it look cnidarian is that there are lots of them and they have sort of ring-shaped structures, ring-shaped muscle structures, and they live in the bottom of the sea? Because, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that could apply to, and especially with the Ediacaran, we want to take a big old grain of salt with our interpretations of some of these animals in particular. So here's from a paper shown down there, and it's summarizing, like, where do cnidaria come from? When do they start to exist? What's the earliest evidence for these things? And so, from the Cambrian, from fairly early Cambrian, there are some embryo fossils, even from the, I think, late Ediacaran. I thought there were some little body fossils of things that appear to have the right symmetry and look as though they could be cnidaria. There are also some other things dotted around here that have been called cnidaria and walked back to different degrees over time. So let's look. Here's one of them. So this is Cyclocyclicus. Oh my gosh, that's a lot to say. And what it is a series of chambers that are stacked on top of each other. You get division, which is a thing you see in some corals. Some corals will broadcast spawn, or they have all different ways of growing, but one of the things that some of them can do is to sort of split and then make two little coral heads, so they can basically just divide. Here's the outside of these fossils. They're tiny. They're found various places, but most famously in the Du Chantuo pardon me, formation. And yeah, they've got little layers. So in a normal modern coral, what happens is you've got an animal that's like an upside down jellyfish. And every year it wants to get a little bigger, let's say. So it's going to build a new layer. It's going to move up and put another layer underneath itself. And so there'll be layer, 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 layer going down. This layer will actually be a floor. If it's mineralizing like this one, it'll mineralize that floor. And that part of the building is closed off forever. It's like a tube where you keep moving up and building a new floor on top and then moving up to that over and over and over again. Except we think probably the animal moves up first and then, because it's the animal that's building the floor underneath. Yeah, so that's what it looks like. But the chief reasons for that interpretation are that it sort of splits here and it's got little layers and they appear to be closed off. And more recent studies have pointed out that, well, there are some problems. So this is a kind of fossil. It's found in the same formation, same preservation, and there are Cynocyclocyclicuses there, but these are the ones that we're going to look at. And what they say is, well, you got all these little layers here, just like you would in a real cnidarian. Okay, so far. But quite often, in amongst these layers, and actually closed off by several layers in this broken tube, you'll have these little sort of pouches. And the pouches appear to have, let's zoom in on that, almost looks like cellular remains. So bits of cells, bits that used to be cells, but preserved. And if it's a cnidarian, it should not be leaving part of itself behind when it moves up, because it's just a polyp. It's just a little thing like an upside down jellyfish, and it can't sort of split off half its body like you live downstairs. Why? And we're going to feed and reproduce and stuff on the top floor. Yeah, no, that's insane. So if that's correct, and there are a lot of these at this site, that look like this and have this sort of preservation, that would suggest that these cannot be cnidarians. Yeah, because there is evidence of living tissue left behind in components that should be sealed off, like parts of the tube. So maybe there's something else. Yeah, a lot of possibilities. Here's a group that are more securely cnidarian, and yet also these are one of the least understood fossil groups that are out there. They are called conularids. So conulariida is their group name, but you can just call them conularids. Just squish those two eyes into one. They look like a cone shape. Actually, the top looks like a Chinese takeaway box. Just sort of opens up 4 little flaps. Yeah. Presumably there's something inside, because something made these organisms, but that's the mystery. We're not really sure what it is that made them. And inside they're just hollow. They're completely hollow. So they're constructed in such a way that it looks like they could be most anything, but it's like a hard part in search of an organism. And you find them all throughout the Paleozoic and just a little bit into the end of the Triassic. And that's where they finally go extinct there in the first period of the Mesozoic. And there are also a couple, maybe, I'll show you, from the Ediacaran. Yeah, so let's go. Let's look. Here's one. So this is from the Ediacaran, and this is a fossil of a thing. And the thing is vaguely cone-shaped, so that's a sign in our favor so far. Good job. This thing appears to have tentacles coming out of the top because this particular version of the Ediacaran preservation is a lot more like Chengjiang preservation. So you're going to get no hard parts, but you will get mineralized versions of soft parts. And so you can potentially see what the creature was that made the hard parts if you catch it just right. So that's a cone-shaped thing with tentacles coming out of the top, and people really want that to be a conularid with the animal inside. Because there are some creatures that exist now that look similar to this, and they are definitely cnidarians. And I'll show you. shown down here, these are a different kind of maybe conularid from the late Ediacaran. And here's the fossil. So what you've got are little stripes in the rock. And the little stripes are joined together such that if you had a view of more of this, if there actually was more of this, you might imagine it would form a little box with little joins running down the sides, which is what these things look like generally. There, that's who they are. All right, but here's another little head scratcher. So this one is from Russia, northwest Russia, the White Sea area. And this appears to be a six-sided, something like a conularid. Now, this one does not have any of the soft parts preserved. So this one is death mask style preservation of the hard parts, which are now no longer here. So it is just like a mold. Basically, it is an ichthyofossil that used to be maybe something like a conularid. Whereas normal conularia are four-sided, this one is six-sided, but early on you may get some weird things happening. It is possible. And it does have little stripy, bumpy sides that appear to join on to each other in a way that's not exactly like modern like later conularids, but could be similar. And they drew a picture of it with tentacles coming out, basically based on this idea, which I think may have been found first. So, are those actual conularids? Good question. I don't know. We'll get to some more conularids in just a moment. Actually, let's jump ahead to those conularids. Then we'll reorganize this. So here are some from the Hunsrück shale. This is the one in Germany where everything is turned into pyrite. And here you can see some little strands of something like seaweed. And a conularid animal is glued right on there. And here's some other conularids down here at the bottom. They appear to be quite numerous in this formation. Here are some close-ups of some of these conularids, and look at that. They're looking great. Some of them have their little lids completely open or partly open. Here's an X-ray looking through it. Hard to tell what's going on in there. There might be a creature inside there, sort of balled up at the top, or that could just be infill that has happened during the fossilization process. So what are they? I don't know. But here's the thing that people point to. So there are clear cnidaria, like in that they are evidently cnidarians, like beyond any reasonable doubt. And they have two life stages, because you remember that cnidarians often do. So they'll have this polyp stage where the animal is big, 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 and it sort of sticks out of this entire tube. And then inside, it is stacking up, growing little eggs basically into little babies. And here are the babies all in here. And so the adult basically dies, and then the babies that are sort of stacked up in here will start to activate and will work their way out, sort of squidging along like little jellyfish do. So it goes from being a giant coral-like hollow structure to what is essentially it's like a baby cannon. Yeah, it's little babies all stacked up and they shoot out. And yeah, so strange. And this is a typical sort of Scyphozoan mode of replication. That you form this sort of polyp stage, and then it turns into all the little babies stacked up, which then leave and go on and settle somewhere, form their own polyps, and etc. Yeah, it's the circle of life, the whole thing. Okay, so that's what people have thought. I'm not trying to tell you what to think, because conularids are weird. You can think conularids are weird. That's a pretty safe thought. But those are the ideas. The biomineralization on real conularids, like ones that we can collect lots of in the Paleozoic, is calcium phosphate. So like apatite, like our bones, not calcium carbonate, which you would get calcium carbonate in most modern corals. That's what coral reefs are made of. So potentially a different group of cnidarians that have learned a different way to biomineralize wouldn't be the weirdest thing that's happened. This little guy is Olive-ooides, and here's what it looks like. So it starts out as, we think these are all the same organism. You've got a little sort of blob here, and the blob sort of develops, and it looks like a little sort of star shape on the top. It's got five-fold symmetry. It's like a little star, and so here's the star from the side, here's the star from looking right down at it. Here's a, I think, earlier version with the star-shaped part inside of a little egg. So imagine this is a thing that's undergoing the sorts of metamorphosis that we all underwent during development. If you ever study developmental biology, it's a hoot, yeah. And then it turns into this thing. It's like a little cone, and you've got five-fold symmetry up there, and the cone sort of appears to grow by stacking up individual layers. It has radial symmetry. Presumably there's a mouth in the center, and presumably there would have been tentacles coming off some of these hard parts. And so the idea is that this is a fairly clear, fairly confident Scyphozoan. At least that's what the paper says, and I find that fairly compelling, yeah. Okay, here's some later papers, and they're going to show that, yeah, if you look at the bottom, there is a five-fold symmetric, like a little star. That's one of the first steps that they grow, one of their early metamorphoses. And then down at the tip of the star, there is a little cone-shaped projection, and that's going to be the embryonic stage, because like in a coral, the youngest part's going to be down here at the pointy end, and the oldest part is going to be up here, because they just keep growing, they just keep stacking layers, yeah. Here is the one of the older members of this Olive-ooides, and these are all tiny, yeah, microns. But you've got some cases where it's got these little sort of flaps, and the flaps can be folded in and sort of tucked in, or the flaps can be out a little bit. So here they are folded in. Here are some that are folded out, and it looks like it's the same organism. It's just these are a mobile part. So some kind of lid you can open and shut, which sounds a bit like a conularid, maybe. Here are some more looks at the babies and at some of the substructures in those babies. So here's the little star-shaped organ, and here we got a little arrow pointing to the star-shaped organ. It looks like radial symmetry around there. Here we have earlier versions of the embryo that are only just starting to develop the star organ, the stellate organ, they call it. Yeah, so peculiar. This is the reconstruction. You got this is like a young adult, this is like an older adult because it's bigger, and then the idea is that this would then function as a baby cannon, releasing big fat embryos that will then develop a little star there, and the star is often developed on an inner layer, so you won't necessarily see it from outside. It develops some little wrinkles on the side. You've got these little grooves on the top, which presumably would serve the same function as like tentacles or mesenteries or something. And then it settles down, and it's going to grow into a short version, then a long version of the thing that made it. There you go, Olive-ooides. And then over here, this is their tentative reconstruction, which they aren't really sure about, but the idea is that, maybe you can close these flaps, and the organism inside can sort of push its way out when it wants to feed and pull itself down, and the flaps will sort of self-close over the top of it. Yeah, which would be neat. All right, so that's Olive-ooides. Now let's look at some other jellyfish. So these are jellyfish, uncertain affinity, possibly hydrozoans, that you get in Utah and the Margam Formation. And there is some soft body preservation there, and it's going to be Chengjiang style. So you'll get mineralized, particularly in metal, versions of the fossils, and you'll see their soft parts and their hard parts will all be dissolved away. But these don't have any, so it's great, yeah. Cambrian's a good time for these guys. Here's a little thing. It has been interpreted as one of those sort of cone-shaped coronet jellies with a little fringe of tentacles going around the edge, which certainly looks like it could be. Here is a cnidarian that you can see from the top, and we've got what may be little muscle bands according to this paper, But you may also remember that we saw something that I think was this fossil in a previous paper where they said, oh no, that's definitely a ctenophore. Those are comb rows, not little muscle bands. So we've got something with vaguely radial symmetry, and yeah, we can argue about what it is, which is fine. All right. Box jellyfish are really cool. These are the ones that will like poison you, and it's strong enough that it can actually paralyze you. All corals and jellyfish have some ability to do this, but a lot of them, they have those little harpoons, and they're not long enough and strong enough to get through our skin, our elephant-like skin. And so basically they can sort of stick to us and then nothing happens, and no big deal. But these can actually kill you, yeah. Here are examples of what appear to be something like a box jellyfish, and again from the Middle Cambrian Margin Formation up in Utah. Here is a later one, so this is Carboniferous, and this one is conveniently dyed with its little tentacles sticking out at the bottom. So box jellyfish will have bilateral symmetry, pretty rigid, as opposed to the kind of radial symmetry that you would get in Hydrozoa or coronet medusa, for example. Here's a hydrozoan, and so you can see they've got nice little light-sensitive glands and lovely little tentacles for catching things. Here's a fossil of something that is probably similar to a hydrozoan. So this one has what appears to be bilateral symmetry, but you can see that in moon jellies. It's just that it's not always bilateral. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 5. It's just kind of a weak radial symmetry. Around the edge, you see these little wrinkles, which the authors say are probably little muscle bands. And these at least run all the way around, and so it's possible, yeah. If you have a jellyfish and it's drying out on the beach, or if you happen to go to the beach and see one, have a look, and you may see these little wrinkly muscles. It looks plausible anyway, yeah. Yeah. So, questions for thought, study, and review. Which aspects of soft-bodied cnidaria are most likely to fossilize? Well, when they have hard parts, the hard parts, definitely. But then it depends on the location. So in these exceptional fossil locations, like you get in Utah, like you get in Xinjiang, like that one place in China that's not Xinjiang, where this guy is from. Wait for it, that one. There we go. Lantian. There we go. Yeah, in those places you get preservation of the soft parts, which is unusual everywhere else, but it really works for cnidaria. What are conularids? Yeah, who knows, but that was just the information on what they can do. So they can maybe open and close their little lids. There may be a creature with tentacles inside, if that Ediacaran fossil is to be believed. Interesting things about them, they are specialists. In areas where you find conularids, you usually find almost nothing else or nothing else. It's like they were either living somewhere that was so inhospitable that no one else lived there, or when they lived there, there was something so bad about their lifestyle that nothing else could live in the area. Yeah, they tend to be sort of monoculture fossils, yeah. Which is neat, yeah. They also, the ones that we'll find, tend to be associated with deep water, yeah, particularly. What biomineral do they contain? That would be calcium phosphate or apatite, which looks a little bit like steely gray, or sometimes will weather to this awesome rainbow sort of color, sort of a light gray with a bit of red and blue in it. It's really neat. What do we know about their ecology? So that's what I just mentioned. They tend to absolutely swarm in some areas. They're marine, prefer deep water in a lot of cases. What's the evidence for a Scyphozoan interpretation of conularids? Well, that's the evidence. And if you want to watch the baby cannon shooting off, this little YouTube video will take you there and you can see it happen. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Let's see, what is olive ooides? And it's a little thing with 5-fold symmetry, which would be weird. We don't usually have strict 5-fold symmetry outside of the echinoderms, but early days, and yeah, a lot of strange things could happen. Developed, you got evidence of a sort of a swimming, floating version, and then you got evidence that this is the same thing that has fivefold symmetry when it's laying down. It basically forms a little cup with a pointy base, and then you've got that little cup growing by layers. But the layers are just on the outside. It appears to be hollow on the inside, so it's just where the organism lives. And then it also appears to have a little lid that it can open and shut, potentially when the organism inside wants to go out and feed versus hide. Yeah. It's believed also to be calcium phosphate mineralization. What's Nemiana simplex? Your guess is as good as mine. This is the Ediacaran thing. We have a couple of fossils of them in the teaching collection, and they're neat, but I don't know what they are, and I don't think there's a very strong indication that they are cnidaria. They are little pockets in the biofilm, and beyond that, they are something. Probably an animal, and I couldn't really tell you what. Yeah. So there you go. Thanks very much.